I'm about to read All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr, and I'm really excited about this book. So from my understanding, this book is about two main characters. One of them is named Marie, and she and her dad are in Paris, and I believe that her dad works at a museum, and the story kind of takes place like during World War II, so they kind of escape, and I'm not entirely sure why, but they kind of bring this like very valuable jewel with them. And on the flip side, there's also a character named Werner, who is an orphan, and he lives in Germany. And he kind of like listens to the stories on the radio, and apparently he's really, really good at like fixing stuff. So he kind of gets like enlisted with the resistance during like World War II time. And it kind of like follows around those two characters. And then at some point they end up like meeting after like they both lost a lot. They were both on opposite sides during the war. And so I understand that it's just kind of like gonna follow around these characters as they kind of like grow up, which is one of my favorite kind of things to just follow around. And like, sometimes it sounds really boring. It's like, yeah, it's a story about following two characters, but it's a story of following two characters who go through a lot in a very interesting setting. So yeah, let's crack open this book and start reading and probably get a easier way understanding of what it's about. I feel like it's hard to explain like stories like this because it's like we're following around two people, but yeah, let's follow around two people. About 100 pages into All the Light We Cannot See, and I think this book is written very, very beautifully. So it kind of starts off with Marie and Werner and kind of like where they are right now. Like they're towards like the end of the war, but still in the war. And so it kind of like shows Marie's character, and she is blind. So it's a really interesting perspective that you get to see her like in the war kind of area, like trying to take cover. Like letters kind of come, and the letters are like, oh, like take cover, but it's not in Braille, so she can't read it, and she's like relying on her dad and like her uncle, but neither of them are there, kind of like in the opening for whatever reason. And so she kind of is like trying to hide. And then on the flip side, Werner, who's our other main character, he is like a soldier right now, and so like he's kind of like taking cover before they're like dropping like bombs and like all of this stuff. And then kind of flashes backwards to their lives growing up. So Marie's life, it kind of starts off when she's around 6 or 7, and she can still kind of see, but not very well. And it isn't until a little bit later, like a month or so after her introduction, that she does go fully blind. And what's interesting is that there's kind of like this magical aspect to this book that I didn't expect. And the way it's introduced is really cool. It's essentially this stone. And if you remember the beginning, I mentioned, I was like, I don't know what the stone, like the importance of the stone is. That's kind of mentioned in like the summary on the back. But this stone is kind of like a magical stone, but it's also like cursed at the same time. And so basically anybody who holds the stone is going to be immortal. However, people that they love, people around them are either going to die or have really unfortunate like things happen to them. And so Marie's dad is like a locksmith at the museum, and so she's always at the museum, and one of the museum people is kind of explaining the story to like the group of children about like how the stone was actually created by like a goddess as a gift to her lover, and like how a human pretty much like took it out of a dried up lake because it was put in the lake for like a river or a lake god. And so like the prince kind of takes it and it makes him immortal, but then like everybody around him like dies, like his kids die, his wife dies, like everybody's getting sick, but he's immortal. And then he disappears, and then 200 years later somebody else finds the stone, and they kind of take it and they put it on their staff, and they're immortal, but everybody around them, again, is having a really, really bad time. And it kind of reminds me of Lord of the Rings in the way, like the one ring of power, like everybody wants it, and it's kind of making them like corrupt and kind of like, you know. So we get to learn about Marie and her dad, and like basically how he kind of helps her become independent. He builds like this miniature model of their town, and she ends up learning like what the town looks like, how many blocks away it is to get to her house. And so like when she kind of like knows that, he kind of takes her out, spins her around, and she kind of like navigates her way back home, which of course is really hard, but eventually she gets the hang of it because she is really, really smart, and she's really great at like cracking puzzles and stuff as well. So every single year for her birthday, her dad builds her like a little puzzle box, and he gives her a braille book, and so she's able to read a book, and she's also able to like solve this puzzle like really, really quick. And then for Werner's side, he's growing up as an orphan in Germany, and he and his little sister are at this like orphanage. And part of the thing with this orphanage is that once you turn 15, you have to go work in the mines. And so he and his sister's dad died in the mines, and he doesn't really want to do the mines, but you know, what else is there to do? And he kind of discovers this like radio, and then he also discovers that he loves to take things apart and put them back together, and he becomes really, really good at it. So he ends up fixing this busted up radio, and so he and his sister are always listening to the radio, like everybody kind of in the orphanage is listening to the radio, and there's kind of like a science-y radio show from Paris, which I wonder if it's Marie's dad who hosts it. I'm not entirely sure, but somebody in Paris hosts this like radio show that he and his sister really, really love, and they kind of tune into and understand more because like they get access to this now. So Werner becomes pretty well known in the area as like the boy who can fix things, and so people kind of like hire him to fix their radios and really any of their things that require like his handyman assistance. So he's just this little kid running around fixing things and kind of going on his way. And so it's just kind of following like him and his sister as they're kind of navigating the world, and how World War II and like kind of the propaganda and everything is starting to leak through to the orphanage, and kind of how stuff is being taken away, like the radio, certain channels you can't listen to, like the books that he's reading, he can't read them. Like it's interesting because it starts off very, very slow, and then once it hits like the actual war, it's like, wow, like yikes. And so it is kind of flip-flopping a little bit. So like it kind of shows a little bit of like when they're growing up, and then it goes into the present day for a little bit to kind of show you like what's going on, and then it kind of goes back a little bit. At first I was a little bit like, wait, what time period is this again? Then I have to like realize like, okay, yeah, like this is the parts. And maybe it's because like I'm sick and I'm not my brain isn't understanding like oh, like this is like the future and this is the past, because I'm pretty sure like if I wasn't, I would probably know like what's going on. But that's the only thing I'm a little bit like, wait, what's happening now? Like why are they doing that? And I'm like, oh, okay, I gotcha. But yeah, I've been having fun reading this book. It's a really easy read as well, even though like the story itself, it's not an easy story, but easy to read as in like it's written really, really well. It's very beautiful. There's some great prose in it, and there's also like the chapters are bite-sized chapters. It's like 3 pages per chapter, so it really feels like you're kind of like going through a lot of it really fast because of the way it's kind of like formatted. Like I'll kind of give you an example. Like here's one chapter. It's just like 2 pages. See? So it's very bite-sized, and it's really easy to just curl up with this and read it, and it's written so well that it's like you really do feel like you're there, and the characters feel real too, which is great. Like it feels like the story is, again, like I said, it's just like a story about following 2 people as they navigate like a tough situation, and as they're growing up in the midst of a war, and how they kind of get involved in the war, and like their perspectives of that. So I think that's interesting. And I also like the little like whimsical, like the little magical part about like this stone. Like how is the stone going to kind of affect them as they go on? And like Marie and her dad, they're kind of taking care of the stone, and so they made 3 fake stones and then like the real one, and they kind of like sent them off like when the war started, so people wouldn't be able to know who has the real one, to kind of like protect it. There's a lot happening. I'm having fun with this, and I'm going to continue to read, and I'll update you when I'm about in the halfway part. I'm about halfway through All the Light We Cannot See, and this book is getting really dark, which, I mean, as you'd expect in a World War II book. So Marie is with her great uncle, and I can't recall like the relationship of like the woman who lives at that house. I think she's just a maid though, and her dad, and they're all just kind of there, and like the neighbor thinks that Marie's dad is super sketchy because he's like always out and about. He's like measuring stuff because he's making like a model of this new town for Marie, so she knows like her way around, and that way like again she can be independent. And he also seems to have what I imagine is the real stone, and so he kind of gets this letter, and it's like, hey, you got to come back to the museum. And he's like, should I bring the stone? Should I not bring the stone? And then on his way there, he actually gets arrested because they think he's up to something real sketchy, but he's managing to like send letters to his daughter. I wonder if he's been like sent to one of the camps, because like the way his letters are written definitely makes it seem like he's hiding something in order to comfort his daughter, because he's talking about like all the great food that he has there, and that all the people there are great, and the work is great, and he's getting healthier and stronger. But I mean, knowing what the camps were like in World War II, I'm imagining that he was probably sent there and he's just like pretending that he's in a really great place. I'm not entirely sure, but I don't trust it. It feels fishy to me. And so on the other side, there's Werner, and he's going through like the schooling, and it's like the really intense one, and they actually put a prisoner like in the middle of the yard in the middle of winter, and they had every single student douse him with water until like the guy froze to death and died. And it's like, that's just like some of the really dark stuff that happens in this book, and like, yeah, I can't even imagine like how hard that must be. And Werner has like this friend who's really nice named Frederick, who like really, really loves birds, and they're both passionate about like different things. Like Frederick loves birds, and Werner really likes engineering, and so the only reason they're there is because they want to get that education, and they don't really believe in like what's being taught. And a lot of propaganda is being taught. They're learning about genes, and like how there are some superior genes, and like all of this, and so all the students are kind of being indoctrinated that way. And so aside from our like two main characters and like some of the stuff we see with like her dad, which we haven't really seen her dad since he got arrested and like is sending these letters, so again, that goes into my suspicions that something's up. There's also this other guy who's named Von Rumpel, which maybe I'm immature, I think that's a hilarious name, and he's basically looking for the diamond that we know that like Marie has later in the future. And so kind of following him, and he's like interrogating people and trying to like find this diamond, and so he really, really wants it. And so kind of following him and like in the real time, and then also like in the past, and like how long he's been looking for it. So that's also interesting, like this guy who just really, really wants this diamond, like this super important stone, and like I'm pretty sure he believes that it has like that magical property to it. So we will see. So I'm gonna continue to read this book, and I will update you probably as I get closer to the end, or at the end. We'll see. So I'll see you in my next update. So I just finished All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr, and this was so depressing. But I mean, what do you expect from a World War II book? But the way that it was done was really, really well. It's like if you ever watched the movie The Pianist, or if you ever read The Book Thief, those kind of endings and story, like that kind of thing is definitely like very felt throughout All the Light We Cannot See. I don't know personally if, or even how old Anthony Doerr is, but it really did feel like he had experience in the war. And like, if he did, like, that makes sense why the writing is so lush, and like, it really feels like you're there. But also, like, if he didn't, I think that's even more impressive, because it really, you could really feel like the characters, you could feel the setting, like the tension, the grotesqueries of war, like all of this. And get in the perspective of the characters like as kids, like Werner growing up in Germany. I mean, I doubt that especially the kids really knew like what they were doing, like especially when they were enlisted. And in Werner's case, like he didn't really have a choice. He was forced to enlist at 16 because of his like technical capabilities, and like he didn't really know. Like his sister knew, but he didn't really know. Like he was definitely questioning throughout the entire book, like, am I doing the right thing? Like this doesn't feel right, like I need to leave, especially like with what happened to Frederick and like his sister and like all of this. So just really thinking about that, I think was really interesting to get like kind of like his perspective, because it really made him human and kind of made you feel with him despite him being kind of like on the wrong side. And then of course, like with Marie's story, not only is she a child who was forced to evacuate from like her home with her dad, she's also blind, and so it's really hard for her to like navigate through these areas, not really know what's happening. And there was a really great scene where like Von Rumpel was trying to like basically kill her, and she didn't know where he was, and so she's like hiding in the attic, and she has like these 2 cans, and she doesn't know what the 2 cans are. One of them turns out to be like beans, and so she like drinks bean juice and like is eating like beans and stuff, and then the other one is peaches, which is really nice. But yeah, like that was like so well done, because she's like holed up in this attic, and she's like, okay, like where is he? Like she can kind of guess where he is, but like she doesn't know, like she can't rely on her sight to kind of help her out of that situation, which I thought was really interesting and really well done. And the ending scenes, like it's kind of hard to explain like by chapter, right? Because like every second page is a new chapter, but towards the end of the war is a better way of putting it. Like when the war ended, like kind of all the stuff that happened was just so heartbreaking. Like the way that certain stories ended, and like it was tragic. It was tragic, but I think like that was so good. Like you don't really expect a story like that to end happily. Like sure, some characters they made it out, right? Like they ended up living lives after, but like the repercussions, or just like living with the knowledge and the memories, and for other characters, like with what they did, will haunt them forever and follow them forever. So yeah, this was one of those books that it was really well written. It was definitely bite-sized, beautiful, just like descriptions, really real and human characters with human consequences. And so with that, I will rate this book 4 stars. And the reason I wouldn't give it 5 is because like it's not incredibly enjoyable because of how painful it is and like how hard it is. And it's also not one of those books that I think that I'm gonna be like obsessed and read everything about it. That's kind of like typically what goes into 5 stars, so like that kind of category. But by no means is this book bad. Like a 4 is pretty good. Like this is a 4 book. And I think that this is one of those books that everybody should read at least once. I know personally I'm never gonna read it again because it's just so sad and heartbreaking. It's like The Pianist. Like if you've ever watched The Pianist, this book is like that. It's raw, it's tragic, it's bittersweet, and it's the realities of war and people who were kind of like pulled into it. And that's what makes it so good. And so I think like the book as a whole, like you have to read the whole thing to really feel with it. And it's tough. There's some pages where I'm like, oh, like this is horrible. Like why would that happen? But it's like, that's war. That's what it is. So thanks so much for watching my reading vlog here on All the Light We Cannot See. The next book that I'm going to be reading is Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. And so if you're interested in seeing me read this book or any other books in existence that I have on my TBR, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell notification. That way you get notified anytime a new video comes out. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit the like button, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!